Alright, what is up guys, Trail Chasers here. I had a couple of requests to just do a little video about a bike check on this one. And I am getting ready to head up to Snoqualmie for a bit more riding this weekend. We've had a couple of days on it, and there's definitely some things that need to be just addressed with it and tuned up, so I figured we'll do a little check while we're going through and getting the bike all ready for the weekend. Before we do get into the maintenance on this bike, I do want to give a quick rundown on it. It was a 2008 Kona Stinky that I had picked up for $300. I'd been searching around very specifically for this QR back end with a totem up front, and I finally found the right one and went and picked it up. It was pretty well beat up. The fork needed a lot of work and was missing dials. The shock needed work and was missing dials. There was a seat clamp that was actually hitting the rocker arm at full travel and gouging into the metal a little bit. The brakes had seized on it, which is pretty common for those avids up at the lever. The cylinder just expands from the dot fluid and get wedged in place. So it definitely needed a lot of work. Drivetrain was shot, but yeah, it was a fun refresh. So one of the things that does need to be addressed on this bike is this rear tire. It is an EXO casing DHR2, and it is just not holding air tubeless. I don't think I'm going to run tubeless on this right now. I've got a DHF downhill casing and a tube that I'm going to slap on the rear for the moment. Other things that are going on, I do need to bleed the front brake here. It was getting a bit spongy the other day and I could feel it in the lever. So I'm probably just going to do a quick burp. I don't think there's any air trapped in the caliper, just because that's still got a factory bleed on it and it was only shortened at the lever. So I think I just got some air trapped in there that I need to tap out. We're going to see how this derailleur functions for now. It's a microshift advent. Last time when I posted the Snoqualmie chainless runs, I had broken off the Surly Singulator single speed tensioner that I was using on this. And to be honest, that chain tensioner probably wasn't a good choice for this bike. I figured I'd run into issues, but it was something that I had. So now we're on a more traditional derailleur, and I've just got that locked out with a little piece of inner cable there, so that it acts as a little single speed tensioner. But anyways, we do also need to true and tension the wheels. I've just had a few days on them now. They've lost a little bit of spoke tension since I've built them, just kind of through the break-in process. Other than that, we're just going to do a nut and bolt check and tidy it up a little bit, do a full inspection on it before we go ride. I think we're just going to start by taking care of that rear wheel here. One thing that is a bit annoying with this is you do have to use the 15 mil since it's not QR and it's not a through axle. But so far stiffness feels pretty good. The bike doesn't have a ton of flex in it. The rear wheel is a little bit more complicated to remove since it does have the gear cable going to it. Although it's really not that bad. And I've always got a 15 on me, so it doesn't take too long. Alright, the bike is mostly prepped and ready to go for tomorrow, so kind of show you through it really quick here. Like I said, downhill casing tire and tube in the rear. Coil shocks back on there. Did a full bolt check. There were a couple of pivot bolts that had started to loose, so those are back up to torque spec. What else did we do? Did a quick little burp on the front and rear levers. Didn't get anything out of the rear. Got a lot out of the front. So that should make a pretty big difference there. Did a little adjustment to the suspension, and I think we are all ready to go. So I guess I will see you guys here at the bike park. Alright. So some information on the bike. This is a 2008 Kona Stinky. It had a RockShox Totem World Cup Air on it, which I was actually really happy about. The guy said it was broken, so these forks are a little bit of a crapshoot when it comes to what you get with them. There were damper issues on a decent amount of the models, and he had said this one wasn't functioning properly. Luckily, all the compression dials were just locked out, so I backed them off and opened them up. The damper worked fine. So the fork had a full rebuild on it with fresh oils and seals. It feels pretty good right now. There is definitely a little bit more stiction than like your typical fork because it's got the double set of oil seals on there instead of your typical just like single wiper that you see on a lot of modern forks. It's really not that bad though, and once the fork's moving it actually feels quite plush. The damper's maybe not the best. It does feel a little bit dated and more similar to like an entry-level damper on a modern RockShox fork. Something that I am playing around with the idea in my head is getting a tap and die to make an adapter to run a modern Charger 3 damper out of like a Zeb or something in the Totem here. I think that'd make it feel really nice and honestly help it bring the bike up to a little bit more modern of a performance level. It is a size medium frame, so it's definitely a little small for me. That's why I have the big risers on there. It almost makes the bike feel more like a BMX bike, and I really do like the small frame size for me. It's such a playful bike just because of how short it is. It is still fairly slack at 63.5 when I measured it because of that 27.5 front wheel. So it is a mullet setup, which makes it pretty snappy in the corners, but it still likes to plow if you let off the brakes. So it's a bike that still feels really confident so far on a lot of the technical descents. Maybe not so much when it gets super steep, but if it's fairly steep and twisty, the bike's really easy to get along with in that terrain. One thing that I maybe am not the most fond of in riding is in muddier conditions. It's already a loose enough bike as is because of how short it is and how short the back end is. So when it gets muddy out, the back end of the bike is really just fishtailing on you the whole time, which is fun for a while, but if you're trying to ride more like technical stuff, it gets really old pretty quick. The internally geared hub has been kind of fun. It's definitely got some pluses and minuses. One of the big minuses is, yeah, it is a little bit less efficient than like your typical drivetrain. I can feel it a little bit when I'm pedaling around on like the flats and stuff, but usually when I'm on the downhill segments it's not too noticeable. And it is nice to be able to just slap it into whatever gear I want and have it be there. There's a couple trails at Snoqualmie that have a couple little grade switches on them, and it's really nice to be able to go from like one of your faster gears to just a easy climbing gear in a flick of the grip shift and not having to pedal is another big thing. Normally in some areas you wouldn't be able to dump a bunch of gears because you can't pedal before the little grade switch, but on this bike it isn't a problem. I just slap it into gear and it's there. And that's probably the biggest plus of that internal gear sub so far. And now that we've got most of the drivetrain issues worked out, it does seem to be working pretty reliably. I haven't had any misshifts in the past couple of rides. And I wouldn't expect it with the uncut shifter. We'll have to see if I can get it set right this time and not cut it too short. If so, I'd like to run that setup again because I really just do prefer how it feels. I don't like the feeling of the grip shift there, but it is the only option of the shifter for this hub. Speaking of the hub, it is a Shimano Nexus 7-speed corrosion-resistant e-bike rated hub, so I'm hoping it will hold up to the abuse that I'm going to put this bike through. So far it seems to be pretty good. I do see a little bit of dirt collecting around the seal area, so that lets me know there's a little bit of oil or grease working its way out of there, and I'm sure it's going to require more maintenance than a typical hub would, with more cleaning and re-greasing. That's something I've done quite a bit in the past, working on a lot of commuter bikes. I've gotten pretty comfortable with the Nexus hub sets, so I have a decent understanding of what tends to happen to them and why they misshift and how to alleviate that. I'm not saying that I won't run into that on this bike. I certainly can. What I've ran into the past is bending axles on these hubs when they're ridden past, what they're intended for. And they'll surprisingly still function. But it is something that will eventually break the hub. And I'm not confident that this one won't bend, but since it's the e-bike rated variant, I have a little bit more faith that it might survive a little bit longer than your typical Nexus hub would. Going back up to the cockpit, the brakes are some pretty inexpensive Shimano MT501s, I believe. It's just the cheap quad pistons with the Servotex, and I have metallic pads on 200s. That gives me enough power here in the park with a cheap brake set, and they are really light levers, which is one thing that I like about them. So for these long days in the bike park, I find it a comfortable shape that just gives a lot of power, so my hands aren't getting as tired from holding on to those levers. The wheel and tire setup is another kind of interesting part of it. The wheels are light bicycle carbon rims. They were ordered specially for this bike, so the rear is a 36 hole by 35 millimeter inner width rim, and the front is a 32 hole, 33 inner width rim, so slightly narrower up front to help even out the contact patch between the front and the rear. Along with that, I run a 2.5 inch tire in the rear and a 2.35 up front. So with that tire setup, it gives a pretty even contact patch, and I find the grip to be pretty similar front and rear. One thing that I was struggling with at first when I was running the same size tire front and rear was the back end really wanting to wash out, and the bike just had a big tendency to oversteer, which usually was pretty fun in the corners, but if you kicked off of a rock weird or something like that and it just caused some sudden oversteer, it could really put you off your line and kind of mess up what you were doing. The Totem does have pretty good clearance as well for large tires like that 27.5. It was built to clear a 26 by 2.8, so the clearance in the crown is actually pretty good, and I feel comfortable even putting a mud fender in there to help keep some of the crud out. Definitely don't need to right now with the summer conditions, but it's something I'll consider in the fall. The clearance honestly looks fairly similar to what you'd see on a regular 27.5 fork. A little fun fact, Norco used these Totems with 650B wheels when they were testing the Range 650B platform. So if Norco feels comfortable enough to use the Totem with a 27.5 wheel to test their platform, I feel comfortable enough to do so as well on my little test platform.
Gotcha. Well, you have a good one.
The bike was just a quick rattle can paint job. The decals were picked up off of eBay, so it was a really inexpensive paint job. The bike gets absolutely hammered in the park, and putting it on racks and lifts and shuttling, the paint's just going to get hammered, so it's easy enough to have rattle cans where you can just section off the part of the frame that's all dinged up, give it a quick scuff down, prime and spray, and get it all nice again. So it's a cheap job, but it also makes it easy to keep the paint looking better longer. And I also just don't have to worry about it. Like, I'm never thinking about scratching my frame in the park or babying the bike. That is the last thing on my agenda. It's really just fun to go out there and let the bike absolutely rip and hang loose and not hold back on it. It was a pretty inexpensive build overall, especially with my industry discounts. I was able to keep the whole thing under $1,000. So compared to like picking up a new freeride bike or a new downhill bike, I definitely ended up saving a good chunk of change there. It's certainly not as fast or as, refined as the new modern crop of bikes, but it's still very fun to ride, and I don't honestly think it holds me back that much. It feels like a special bike whenever I ride it, and people always stop and ask me about it, and it's super fun to talk about it. So for me, it's been a really fun project, and I just enjoy riding something that's a bit different, something that you couldn't necessarily just go out to the store and pick up. This was a bike that took a lot of planning and a lot of work to get put together, and it took some ironing out to get it running right, and now that I feel like it's in a pretty good place, it is a really enjoyable bike to ride, and I've been having a blast on it. A good example of you don't always have to spend a ton of money to end up with something that you really love and enjoy riding, and something that can turn heads at the park too. So If you're ever thinking about building a weird bike, go for it. I don't think you will ever regret it. I know I certainly haven't, and I'll probably continue to build more weird bikes here. But I do want to thank you guys for taking the time to watch this video. I'll let you enjoy the rest of this riding footage here. This has been Trail Chasers, and I will see you guys later. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Oh my God. Thank you. Okay. Hey, it's smooth through here now. Wow.
for the section. I'll lead for the middle. I'll show you.
Come on. Oh my god, I'm riding like shit. Oh, come on, foot, get on that pedal. Oh, thank you. Oh, that was a huge hit.